So yeah, so just do a quick show and tell of what I got going on for access. Let's see here. So this is the thing called service accounts, which is actually bots. So you know how we have security bot, things like that. We are giving that feature to our users. And we currently have a variation of that in access tokens. So, nope, not activity. Let's see. We have that here, and we also have it at projects. So whenever you do this, it generates a generic user as a bot, and it allows you to do certain things. We are trying to do this where it's not tied to a user or an object, and it has more flexibility. So the idea would be that you can create an account and you can create various tokens associated to it. So in this case, we'll say I want an access token or a skim or a deploy. You can select a role like a maintainer or whatever and assign a scope. And then it will generate your access token, and you can use that for your bot service. So from here, you would be able to return or create a new access token based off of whatever you want here. So this is kind of like the first iteration on how this would work. And I've already gotten a bunch of feedback from some other folks. So I've had some other interviews lined up. These are all internal stakeholders right now, TAMs and support and my front-end engineering manager. But there's been discussion on how this would work across the organization. So that's my next iteration is testing this with not at the instance level as we have it here, but rather at every level. So top level group in the SaaS environment or the instance level at the top, and then groups and projects based off the idea that anybody should be able to make these sorts of tokens. But I have some questions on security, if that's a good thing to allow people to do. But yeah, so I'll investigate that. If you have any feedback, like I said, it's mostly just a show and tell about bots and service accounts. I don't know if any of y'all have any interest or need for service accounts or bots.
How does it differ than the current flow, Daniel? Like what you're proposing, other than the instance level?
Yeah,
Like
so the flow is definitely different because currently the way that it works is that at the project level, you would generate an access token first, and then that goes and creates a bot user that nobody ever would ever see unless you were to go look for it. So that's the current flow. I'm curious if that's a logical flow. And so that's what I'm going to try and validate with this prototype with external customers. Also, the limitation of only having one token per user is what we currently experience. So this iteration would allow us to associate various tokens for a particular or individual bot, which would allow more flexibility and future growth. So if I want to say I have a security bot and it has a defined role and a defined task, and in the future we have some sort of new feature implementation, we can actually add to that by just going and modifying that experience or that user or bot. And so that would be the idea of this new flow or new process that we're trying to iterate on.
Was it only one bot? Like currently, is it one bot per project? Is that what you mean? And like in the future, the bot can do multiple things? Is that what you're thinking? Like
one token per bot right now. And in the future, you can do multiple tokens per bot.
And then what problem is that solving? I just want to get up to date on bots.
So right now, users are having to create a user seat that takes up a billing seat. And so it's not necessary because these bots never interact with the environment. They never interact with the platform. And strictly, they get into the system with their token, they do a task, and then that's it. So having them pay for that seems kind of unfair. Other organizations don't have that also. So we want to try and help that, as well as offer, security flexibility or flexibility for security features, external APIs, things like that, make them connect to the system using these bot services and do whatever sort of thing that they would not have the ability to do within our environment.
So is it now, would it still be 1 seat per bot, no matter what, even if we have multiple tokens?
It would be zero seats.
That's cool.
I don't have a ton of feedback. Unfortunately, my Wi-Fi froze in the middle of your presentation and I had to switch to a different Wi-Fi, so I missed a portion of it. But it seems like what you're trying to accomplish is understanding or validating if it is valuable for the user to have multiple tokens per bot, correct?
Not exactly. No, this was just kind of like a show and tell of what we're doing. What we're validating is the flow logical, and does the feature allow for flexibility in the future? So I'm going to present it to, or offer it to, a round of feedback testing from external users and see their take on it, and does it meet their need, based off of the feedback that we already have received in that issue, because it was quite a long issue and actually quite heated. There's been some very grumpy internal and external customers. So yeah.
You knew there was such passion about tokens and bots.
I feel like taking up 0 seats is going to be awesome though for people. So that's cool.
I don't know how useful I'm going to be here, but I'm going to attempt to at least appear to be useful. Daniel, you, in the flow that you showed, there was like a generate token screen, and the token actually shows up. And then you typed up, you hit a button for create bot, I think. From that,
I'll go back and I'll take a look here.
yeah. The reason I bring that up is that from this, yeah, right here, you started talking about like multiple bots, multiple access tokens, that sort of stuff. And I was wondering if we would need the user to be able to copy that token to a clipboard at this point.
Yeah, that was one of the feedback points that I had in my discussion, is how does somebody save this? Is there a download button? Is there a copy paste, something like that? So I definitely want to iterate on that and figure out what's the most logical solution for that. Because this is a one directional thing only. You can't come back to it and look it up because it's always a security problem. So I want to find out, or I'm open to suggestions. If you have feedback, what do you think would be a good solution here, apart from just like a little button that says copy or download a text file with this serial number, which I assume might be kind of sketch, downloading an object to an unknown location. Yeah.
Yeah, I would wonder about the security of it as well. Downloading it, or if it's just a code that we can copy to clipboard, and then there's a way that we can salt that in a secure situation. I would hope, I would imagine, and maybe we haven't gotten there and we can contribute this, but in our design system, we would have like a little clipboard icon or something that goes next to the feed or attached to the field, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it would just be an icon button, what we would have, and I would just use that copy function for it. And that's what I was thinking, is that for our first MVC is just, let's try that and get feedback on it to see if this is a logical thing. Because the way that it would work is that you would take that access token and put it into your code. And so you would have 2 windows up, and then you would move on with your task. And my assumption is that would be the logical process. So that's what I'm going to try and validate.
We have that icon, by the way, in issues. In the sidebar for reference and issue email, there's a little like click to copy icon, and there might be a pattern there. Cause I think we show a tooltip as well when it's copied that says, hey, it's copied. I'm pretty sure we do also for copying the ID for projects. So that might be something else to look into. I'm curious, just looking back at the screen you just showed, and I apologize if you touched on this and I missed it, but it looked like the blue button, the primary button, was a return button as opposed to the create button, which seemed to be using secondary styling. I'm curious about the reason behind that.
Yeah, so that I was asking about what should be the primary action, because the return takes you back to the screen that you were starting from. And actually, this is the start screen where you have your list of service accounts and you would create a new account. Currently, we don't have a system for that in our pajamas logic. We only have a primary action or a secondary action, and not a logic of returning to your previous screen, and not the actual container heading, because this would take you way back beyond what I would want. So I'm not sure what the best thing would be here, because if you don't want to create a new token, arguably, I think that would be the more logical assumption, is that you only need necessarily one type of token. And so you're done, and then you would return to the list of tokens. And now that I say that out loud, perhaps going to the list of tokens is moot, unless this save is part of the problem that I'm thinking of now. Like, as I go through it, like create, give it a name, and then save it. You can do that without tokens, and then you can create a token. How this process stumbles at that point.
The previous screen that has this one here, this one is a little bit confusing to me, just because you do have the ability to create and then save. Maybe save could be disabled until they've entered an account name, just to kind of help reinforce that there's a relationship there, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Yeah, so basically I've skipped that frame in this prototype, in this wireframe. So definitely I need to add fidelity for that and have that screen. So clicking here would give them, or this would be grayed out. Clicking here would give them a generic name, and this would be opened or available. But that also brings up the question, is this necessary? Do they need to create the container or the account first and save it before going on, or can they create the token in the same process? So I've created a name, I click on the token without clicking save, and I go through the process, which takes me back to this, which brings me here, and now I have to click save before it does it. I don't think that makes any sense now that I say it out loud.
Daniel, I put it on the agenda, but did you think about, like, I think Austin and maybe Maria a while back were trying to solve a kind of similar problem around like modals. Here, yeah, you can open that if you want. Like, how do you save the access token? How do you even name it? I think you were kind of mentioning the naming of an account or a token. Could you, instead of having that kind of progressive item appear, do a modal, or is that strange within settings?
So I was avoiding the modals for the reason they told us to avoid modals. So yeah, I didn't think about it, because I didn't think it made sense in a modal in this context.
Is it something you have to kind of go through that step in order to return to the previous form that you were working on, to the previous step in the form within your flow?
So yes and no. So if I go back or at the start, I can create an account, I can click and create a name and save it, and I'm done. But I have not given it an access token. And that's where I'm saying, does that make sense? Should it actually just be one unified process where you create the access token and give it a name at the same time? And you can do it
That
just
was
once.
that was one of the items that I wanted to jump in with, was does this need to be so many separate screens? Can this actually be one unified process as well? And then the one thing that I also wanted to jump in on before I be quiet, since I interrupted Alexis, is the way the buttons, the action buttons, jump from top right to bottom to top right to bottom. And that could be solved with a unified sort of flow as well. That's it. Sorry, Alexis.
No, you're totally fine. That makes sense. I think, do we do like wizards really, Daniel? I mean, that could kind of be like, step 1, step 2, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and this is exactly the same problems. Like I agree, the jumping around was kind of like bugging me, but the problem is that we have issues with this in our environment all over the place. Like the save button is like lost in limbo. Let's see if I can find an example. It's just way beyond the fold. I don't know why.
And then you don't realize you need to save.
Yeah, exactly. And so
and we don't tell you that you're leaving without saving.
yeah, exactly. I don't know why I don't have any groups or projects, but yeah, like, so there's cases where we have a lot of content and there's the save is like somewhere down here, like actually several scroll pages down. And I'm trying to think of, is there a better way of doing this? Because it's such a very specific action. The idea of a wizard, I think we need to investigate more as an organization, because I know there are cases for it and it's not really been discussed beyond growth. And Matei was talking about this a while back in terms of generating a wizard or a process to onboard new users. And I think that can help across the organization for things like this, right? How do you go and generate this sort of process? The one thing I have on hesitation there is the making it simple enough, or excuse me, not so simple enough that it would interfere with somebody who's technically competent and says like, I need the token type and the type scope and the code and I'm done, right? Instead of having to click through like a Clippy, right?
Yeah, I think that there's and maybe we're kind of talking along the same line. There's a difference between wizard and stepping out a process.
Yeah.
And like a wizard to me I think of like a actual complicated long process where the wizard actually takes some of that complication away by simplifying it, explaining things. I'm not going to say dumbing things down, but that's kind of in the back of my mind when I say that. But there is also something where, it kind of resembles a wizard because there's multiple steps, but it's just simply stepping the user across a process. There's always a difficulty in Daniel, you mentioned it, which is don't alienate your pro users. Like, you want to make everything as approachable and as easy as possible, but at what cost? And I don't know I don't know the metrics yet, but in these areas, I would imagine you've got your more pro, more sophisticated user, but it doesn't mean that we also don't need to accommodate for somebody that may not understand this, that wants to learn. So it's kind of a little bit of both.
That's kind of like how they implement this process. And they really use like, not a wizard setup, but they do definitely like make things less complicated in terms of the complexity that they offer. So they hide a lot of the complications.
So are you kind of seeing Blair like just a stepped out form? Because that's what I would maybe like there's an advanced section or something, Daniel, right?
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Daniel.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, this sounds kind of like this is setting up for a future of more functionality, where this area is going to see. So maybe setting it up in that stepping fashion, even though right now we could probably take care of this process with a single screen, as we were talking about before, but it may not be like that much longer. And sort of setting the user up for a stepped process might be good in sort of anticipation for the user, those that spend a lot of time in this area. Daniel, I'll leave that definitely up to you on sort of like where you're seeing the future of this going. Do we want to just unify this into a single screen and make it simpler or easier to develop and easier for the user and not going back and forth? Or do we want to think about the future of this area and where that's going? If so, a stepping function may be something to set up for the user.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to do by creating the section where you create the name first and you can just save it and come back to it. And the idea of like, I can do it iteratively and move forward, and that way give some sort of that flexibility. But I don't know if that implementation was logical or worked in this small already method that we have versus like what it could be in the future.
You make an interesting distinction, Blair, between wizards and the stepping process. And I put a note about, if we have time, I'm happy to share about an empty state situation we're dealing with, where we really need to give the user some clarity into a multi-step process that they have to do in order to be able to create an issue. And the specific context is they need to be able, if they come to an issue page, the issue tracker page or issue list page, and they have a group, but they don't have any projects, they don't have any issues, but they can't create an issue until they create a project. So there's kind of a multi-step process that they have to do. And when you're onboarding, this feels especially complex. So I wonder if there's value in exploring kind of a step process with that. I'm trying to articulate this in an empty state right now, which feels maybe overly complicated. But I think that there is value in us differentiating between the two types of processes if we do start documenting it in pajamas, because there are, I think you're right. I think there are different approaches there that tend to happen. And there's a difference in the level of depth required for the user interaction versus how much the system is going to try to take on, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And that's what I was saying earlier about how Mate has done something about this in terms of growth, onboarding wizards, but I think it should be a larger discussion across the organization as where else can we implement this sort of tool of a wizard or a stepping process to get people either onboarded or set up in an environment or set up for a feature to move them into success, right? I know we're past time, but I'm happy to stay if y'all want.
I just put a link to my thing, so y'all are welcome to just check it out. But I told Jeremy it's not a proposal in terms of the graphic. The graphic I just threw on to try to kind of communicate what I'm thinking. But if anybody has a chance to look, I'd love feedback on what I'm proposing there. Hopefully it's pretty clear.
Yeah, I think there's plenty for you to think about, Daniel, on this. And I think that your fulcrum, if you will, on where to go with this is the first thing in my mind would be, if I just want to get an MVC out on this, is in my mind, and this is ultimately your decision, think about that unification, because it's just in my mind, it doesn't seem like it needs to be 2 or 3 separate screens. It could be one. However, with your product counterpart and us, obviously, think about where this is going. And if it's going to get really complicated or several steps deep, then we need to sort of set up that MVC as an anticipation of that complexity. For the best of all of our users, both pro and not so pro.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think that was my next step, was to go back and unify the screens, because I don't think the complexity will be that much in the future to where it needs like a wizard, so to speak. And I think I was just making things overly complicated.
Great.
We want a complex product.
So yeah, like I said, we're out of time, but if y'all want to stick around, I can move on to the next thing.
I can stick around if y'all need to. Otherwise,
yeah,
whatever is preferable by the group.
Yeah, so I was doing where'd it go? It's now gone from, oh, there's at the bottom, the workspaces stuff. There's been no persona research on Sys Admins, which I thought was bizarre. And so we're doing that. And I was curious if anyone could give help or feedback on feedback sessions come and the personas, or not the personas, the testers we got there. And if I know Alexis, you had done one recently, if you have tips on how to generate like a list of people to talk to.
As in like write a screener or like get a list of, what do you mean? Sorry,
Well, I've done the screener and it's already in with the research folks. But I'm curious if there's anything that you've done beyond that, or where they got, or where you got your interviewees.
On user testing, I've had really good luck with just like having kind of, I don't know, not a vague screener, but basing it on what they do in their role every day. So not trying to be too specific around like the title of their role, but like here are some kind of like general jobs. Select the ones that you do and trying to be kind of picky there. But that's really the only place I'm super picky, and I don't care about their role. It's just like, do they do this thing that I want to research? Does that make sense? And I've gotten actually really good people, yeah, for that.
Yeah, that makes tons
and
of
then
sense.
Afterwards, like even asking on user testing, like, hey, if you're interested in talking with us still, can you write your email, things like that. And I've had a few people ask to do more tests. So I've actually had, I feel like sometimes better feedback on unmoderated testing, on user testing, than I have with our like first look. I don't know what's going on, but I've loved it so far. I can help you with screeners, but it sounds like that's not your issue. So
yeah, I'll definitely follow up on that. Holly, you want to talk about wizards?
Yeah, I'll keep it really quick because I know we're over. But again, the specific problem was, let me just share my screen really quick. And I'll show you all the two situations. There is more for me to share regarding work items, but that's such a big topic that probably that'll need to wait until next week. Originally, one of our can y'all see my screen? Okay, one of my engineers reached out and said, did we know that we are advertising for JIRA issue tracking if someone has a group but no projects and no issues on the issue tracker page, but we are not advertising to create a GitLab issue. So we're saying create a JIRA issue, but not a GitLab issue, which isn't really what we're saying, but it's kind of implied because we don't have an explicit create issue button. So it was a good point, but it made me realize that the reason that we don't have a create issue button here is because they don't have a project. And so that led me to think, well, we really need to establish kind of the process that they need to go through. And again, I'm not proposing this graphic or this verbiage necessarily, but just trying to articulate to the user that there's a multi-step process that they need to do in order to see issues at all here. I also raised the question of, is there value in even showing the issue tracker if you don't have any projects? Because you don't have a project, you can't have issues because issues are created at the project level. They may surface at the group level, but they are created at the project level. So if you don't have any projects, why even show the issue tracker feature? To me, that makes sense. My PM and I are in a bit of disagreement about this because he feels that it's better for us to surface that and have that as a discoverability option. So that's something that we're kind of working through. But my thought was initially, if we do keep the current functionality and just try to improve this page for MVC while we research whether or not we should even have issues shown, that we would first encourage them to see that this is a multi-step process and that first they need to create a project, and then second, they can create an issue from that project. This actually led me down this kind of rabbit hole of looking at onboarding in general when it comes to creating an issue as it relates to groups and projects. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So I did create an onboarding issue and spoke with the growth team, and they've been doing some research on it. So I've gotten some good feedback there. But I think for just MVC, is there a better way that we can articulate that this is something that they would need to do this multi-step process in order to see issues here? So this was kind of my first stab at it, but I really think that we do need to have something that's a bit more standardized in terms of like a multi-step, process, kind of like the wizard approach, but simplified, because it's not really going to be a wizard here. It's just clarifying that you need to do two things in order to get to your end goal, which is seeing issues. Any thoughts on any of that though? I'd love to hear feedback.
I'd want to see the originating screen that brought you here.
The original was this.
No, not the original, the originating screen. So whatever you clicked on to see this screen.
In this case, you would have gone to the issues page, the like issue list page, but you don't have any projects. You can still view. So like if I'm in an issue here, it would be this page, but there are no projects, therefore there are no issues. If you don't have a project, you can't have an issue. So there are no issues, but that's again, my thought is, why even show this page?
So you're at the group.
So you're in a group, right? That's what you're saying?
Well, if you're in a group, yeah, because you don't have any projects. So if you're in a group and you try it, so actually it would be going up a level. If you're in a group, why even see this issues list if you don't have any projects? Nothing's going to be theoretically surfacing up at the group issue level. So why even show it in that case?
This feels like
But
a
in order,
bug.
that's
Like,
interesting.
This feels like, because from my understanding of workspaces and merging groups and projects, is that they wanted to bring these features to the group level. And it looks like it was preemptive before they figured out the in-between step by saying, I have no project. Why am I showing you lists? Because we still have issues attached to the project object. And now they're attached to the group object, which doesn't have the project. So now you're in this weird limbo space. So to me, it feels like a bug.
Is that live where you can you create issues at the group level now? Is that what you're?
Well, then that's what I'm saying. So right from here, like if you're at the group level and you go to the list, you'd have to test it. I haven't done it. But what would happen if you were to go at the group level in your own project, go to the issues list, and then create something from there? I'm trying to do it real quick and see if it works. Oh no, I have projects. I'm going to delete this project. But yeah, that would be my first test. Sure.
I can tell you this is something that's been the case since long before workspaces. So I think it's just been this way for a long time. That's my understanding anyway, is that it's not new. I might set up some chat time for you and I, Daniel, just because I'm curious what all's going on with workspaces, and it would be helpful for me, I think, from an issue tracking perspective, to understand how those relationships are changing.
It's okay. I'm at the group. I'm in my issues list. Yeah, there's no way to, I would imagine, clicking an issue here. So to me, this feels like a bug. Why am I seeing this when I can't do this? And it's like, okay, well, you can do this thing, but you need to create a project first. I'm like, well, why am I not seeing to use the issue tracker, you must create a project, blah, blah, blah. Need to be improved and solved in a project. This wording sounds wrong to not explain the problem of why I don't have issues in the issue list.
Agree. And actually, that was something else that I added into the verbiage for the proposed change that I made, was a little bit of explanation as to why that's even relevant. But I'm pretty sure that that page has been there. It's just most people don't come across it because most of us have projects. And so we see projects and issues and don't usually come across the screen. But an engineer came across it recently, potentially testing. It was Alex. Does he work with your stuff as well, the workspaces? I assume not.
Alex Pooley?
No, I forget his last name. Anyway, regardless, they came across it probably doing some testing. And
I think that's exactly what it was, because Alex Pooley is involved with merging groups and projects. And so
Mhm.
I think they might have
Okay.
done this. And that's why I say I think it's a bug.
Interesting.
Because I don't think that should have, like, you shouldn't have this without our current iteration of a project, right? In the future, yeah, it doesn't matter. I can attach an object to whatever I want. I can
Right.
attach issues to groups, but that's not our current situation. And so that was my first assumption. Even if it was like been long-standing, it might have been a long-standing bug or a weird experience that fell through the cracks, right?
Yeah. I think it's probably one of the two. That being said, it sounds like there's already an MR in place to give the ability to create an issue from this view, in which case the empty state language I would expect would be very different than, hey, you got to create a project first. It would actually just be create some issues here in order to see something. So we had already started talking through proposed language for the create a project and then create an issue approach. Would it be beneficial for me to create a bug report about this? Or who do you think I could talk to even first verify that it is in fact a bug, as opposed to maybe some UX debt that needs to be addressed?
I would assume it's less a bug, like official bug, like, oh, somebody typed Q instead of P and the code blew up, versus it's just an experience that we didn't think about. And
Yeah.
now this is the weird side effect.
Mhm.
So yeah, UX debt.
Okay, cool. I'll create an issue about it and I'll tag you in it just to keep you in the loop. Blair, I'm also happy to tag you just in case you want to follow along and see what happens. with
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. Now that I'm familiar with this, somewhat familiar with this, Daniel, I'm kind of thinking the same thing. That it was an unhappy path that a designer wasn't involved with. I'm hoping a designer wasn't involved with. What clues me into that is the odd language that you pointed out, Holly. It's not the best, most helpful language, and then in small, and not only that, and the way that it's chosen to solve the issue is to kick them out to Jira, and that's questionable at first, obviously. But then at the same time, the solution is in that really itty bitty font, and it's like, why would you? That's not very helpful. So I agree. Yes, I'd like to be tagged in on it just so I know what happened.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Well, I know we're way over, so thank you all for the feedback. I'll create an issue about that and tag Daniel. I'll tag you and Blair just in case you want to follow along. And Daniel, I'd love your thoughts on that. That's all that I had, though.
Good to see everybody. Thanks for all the help.
Good to see you all. Thanks so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
great
Bye,
rest of your day.
Bye.
Yeah.